Welcome to the very first edition of Force TV's Missions, where I'm going to be giving you plenty of gen dits, and trust me when I say I've got some stories stored up in here. Now listen, it won't just be me on this platform. We've got a range of guests with some amazing stories who'll all be fed into the sausage machine at some stage of the campaign. Well, to boot things off today, I thought I'd give you one of my more famous stories. You know the one, don't you? Can you guess? Yeah, that's right. It's going to be the anti-piracy story. It's going to be the fridge, all right? We're going to kick it off with the fridge. I'm going to tell you all about it. But first of all, let's take you back to when anti-piracy became a thing. In around 2006, my phone was ringing off the hook with a new problem, all right? What was that problem? It was anti-piracy. Now, the first time somebody got on the blower to me and went, Phil, we've got a problem with pirates, I could imagine somebody stood there with an eye patch on going, "Arr!" with a parrot on his shoulder, still on one leg. But it wasn't that. What had happened was, through a series of events, ecological and man-made disasters, the waters around Somalia became unfishable. So what did the fishermen do? Because they relied on that stretch of water to provide their families with food. Well, they did what anybody would do, look for a second source of income. And nicking ships was it, wasn't it? Right? That's where they decided this is where we're going to make some dough. They started pinching ships. They became quite good at it, all right? So I don't actually blame any Somalian for becoming a pirate. If I'd have lived in Somalia at that time, I'd have been a pirate as well. And think about it, if you can't feed yourself and can't feed your family, you've got to do something, haven't you? And that was the only option they had open to them at the time. Now, as the thing evolved, it became a lot bigger, a lot further, and as the story goes on and on and on, it becomes an entity where now you've got organised crime, terror groups and all that sort of stuff. We're not going to go there today. We're going to stay relatively in early waters, all right? Now, in those days, let's just quickly talk about the tactics of the very first pirates. Pirates. Who were they? What were they? Well, it started off fishermen. Fishermen made up the bulk of the pirates, and then it was the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and anything else they could get in town to get out onto the Oggin to help them pinch these ships. All right? There was a massive market in it, and they used small skiffs. So their tactics really were quite simple. Take a fleet of small skiffs, 20 to 30 foot long at the maximum. All right? Fill it with pirates, stick an engine on the back, AK-47, small arms, nothing bigger, and get yourself out, intimidate the ships into stopping, get on board, pull the ship around, get it in, and then hold it for ransom, make the phone calls and start getting some money in. Hopefully. That was a very, very broad brush. It was working, all right? Some of the first ships that went down the range, the SS Alabama, all right? Everybody heard that story. Captain Phillips' film was later on modelled on that story, all right? It really was just farmers and fishermen on small skiffs in flip-flops, wearing dish dashers with an AK-47, scaring the shit out of people enough to make them turn their ships off and let them get on board, right? That's how it was working. So, in the very early days when I first started taking the phone calls, I'm thinking to myself, what can I do about this problem? My very first trip then, I travelled out to a place called Muscat, and I got on a small ship into the area of what they call the internationally recognised transit corridor. Now you can see that along here in the Gulf of Aden. It comes up towards the north into a pinch point, and then you go up towards Egypt at the very top there. If you come out of here and turn downwards, southwards, all right, that takes you into the Indian Ocean. The main problem at the moment was happening within that Gulf of Aden, all right? It was a difficult time. And the internationally recognised transit corridor was designed such that there would be an armed escort from a flotilla of ships, which were naval ships, proper naval ships in the area, which would take you from point A to point B. All very well and good when you were in between point A and point B. But what happens in between that rat race of getting out of either end and trying to get to where you've got to go? Well, it was exactly that. It was a rat race. People would literally hit the engines as fast as they could and just scoot up one way or another and hope they didn't get taken on. In the meantime, the only real defences in those days, because there were no guns, you weren't allowed guns at sea, and if you did pull in somewhere with a gun on your ship and it wasn't authorised, etc., you can see what the repercussions were. People would end up in prison. So captains had no pistol No guns, no nothing on board, all right? No firearms whatsoever. So, you would get yourself into the ITRC, you'd get from A to B, and like I say, at either end of this, you'd end up in a rat race of trying to get to where you wanted to. It was in these spaces now that the pirates sort of like identified that that was the best place to get you. So, our first concern really was to get on board these ships and defend them as best we could with what we had. Now, I remember my very first trip. I stopped at Muscat, I went down to the port, and I was told I was going to get some defence stores. I was told I was going to get some wire. I was told I was going to get some bits and pieces which would help me defend the ship. Now, when I spoke to the shipping agent, an agent called GAC, the guy looked at me as if I had 4 heads. I said to him, where is the defences for my ship? And he went, no ship. No ship is here. No defences for the ship. Wire. Bolt cutters. No ship. No wire. Anyway, I ended up on the blower back to the UK. Where's the defences for the ship? Oh, have they not turned up? Well, no, they haven't turned up. Where are they? Ooh. Do you know what I was told? I was told by the guy that employed me. Nobody said it'd be easy, Phil. Thank you very much. So that very much was the theme of what was going on here. You were unprepared from the shore. You were moving into a territory of stuff that I hadn't done before, and I was having to learn extremely quickly. Now, I did deem I was staying with inside my skill set. A bit of hearts and minds, a bit of ingenuity, and a bit of jiggery-pokery, and a smidgen of luck, and I was going to make it through the other side. So I wasn't particularly hugely over-bothered about it, all right? So, my very, very first ship, we got on board. The first place I headed was to see the bosun. I explained to the bosun that we needed to get this thing defended slightly with what he had on board the ship, because up until the point that we met with the warships, we were running free, and at the other end where we left the warships, we'd also be running free, so we needed some form of defence. Now, the bosuns were usually someone who understood the ship inside out, and they had their own store predominantly. They had all the gear, all right? They'd have barrels, they'd have any wire that was on board, and they would be able to help you do all sorts of stuff to the ship. They knew where all the hoses were stored, so you could put the hoses at the side, etc, etc. So you would get the ship to as good a standard as you could with what you had. It then came down to things like, we used to have cardboard cutout weapons. Now, the reason we had cardboard cutout weapons was we figured that if you've got 4 or 5 untrained guys on a small skiff with AK-47s, the two things they've got that are going to aid them the most are their ammunitions and their fuel. So if you can get them to run for as long as possible and get them to run out of fuel, that's one way of defeating them. If you can get them to fire their weapons as much as you possibly can and they run out of ammunition, that's another way of defending them. And bear in mind, from sort of like even 25, 30 metres, bouncing up and down on a small skiff with an AK-47, when you've not even understood what the marksmanship principles are, not least have all been taught the marksmanship principles, your chances of hitting me waving at you from a superstructure on top of a ship with a plastic rifle or a cardboard cutout, you got more chance than Nelson getting his fucking eye back, basically. All right, so that was the theory. It was very, very loose. It was very... And actually, when you briefed most of these ships, none of them were going to be up on the decks on the day of the race anyway, because you would put in a system of drills whereby the first thing would happen would be those that needed to be on the bridge would stay on the bridge. That would predominantly be the first officer, maybe the captain, and possibly the bosun. And the rest of the people would be down in the citadel preparing to hunker down. You know, they'd be down there with rations, food and the radio and all that sort of stuff. And if it all came on top, the plan was you'd all lock yourself into the citadel and hopefully sit it out long enough that the top pirates would lose interest in you and get off, all right? That was the theory behind it, and there was a lot of stuff that we did with the sailors, so that we built up a little bit of a trust, a little bit of rapport. I never ever put defences out on my own. I always let them see what I was doing. All right. So the hearts and minds things I learned in the regiment was huge within all this. So assumingly you got your ship prepared and you were ready as best you could be, and you'd briefed up from top to bottom as well as you could, you were ready to rock and roll. You were ready to get yourself into what we called the red water, the pirate water. You were ready to take them on. To a point. Let's talk about my first ever interaction with the pirates. Here we go. Right. I'm going to take you from the very, very start of this trip, because it was a disaster from start to finish, really. So I pitched up, again, I think it was Muscat. I pitched up in Muscat. And on this particular occasion, I remember I'd gone through customs and I'd been stopped. Now, I had a new passport. In fact, no, I was travelling on my second passport because my other one was in for a visa because I was disappearing somewhere else on a job after this one. no matter. I turned up and I got held by customs. And I'm thinking to myself, what are they doing? What are these people doing? They held me and held me and held me. And then one by one, 2 or 3 officials came out and started looking at me. And they're looking me up and down. And I'm looking back at them, up and down. And they're looking at me, up and down. And eventually, one of them asked me if I'm male or female. Now, I had a beard, and I was quite stacked in them days. I said, well, I'm a male, obviously. On my passport, in the small little bit that says M or F, the passport office very ingeniously had put F. So anyway, I offered to flop it out and prove it, at which point they all started laughing and pulled me through customs, and there was no more said about it. So the trip didn't get off to a brilliant start. The other thing was, I was with a Rupert, a young officer who'd got out of the army early. Wasn't particularly competent, if I'm honest. And I'm not going to say his name on here, but you'll know if he's watching who he is. And he wasn't very well. He had some sort of like hard worker-itis or something like that. Do you know what I mean? He just didn't want. He wanted to earn the money, but he didn't want to do the job. And he knew it was going to be a 4-on-4 off long trip up towards Suez from Muscat way. So we literally boarded the ship. Again, we didn't have loads and loads of wire, but we had enough to get the perimeter done. And we made some other bits and pieces, some bouncing barrels and all that sort of stuff. And it was going to be okay. I thought we were all right on here. Now, from the very start, we had a Russian crew. The captain was fucking petrified. He would have done anything to stay in Muscat. He did not want to be on that ship with his troops. He really hated it. He was like, all he went on about from the minute he saw me was pirates, 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 pirates. He was absolutely petrified. And this was resonating through the crew of the ship, so I knew that I had to get him to shut up. The captain loved a drop of vodka. So I sort of like just encouraged him to drink as much vodka as he could, to be honest, to get him out of the way, right? And he obliged. He was not bothered about drinking vodka and going to bed early. He really wasn't. And the first officer loved him. He was a lovely bloke. But again, of his stature, he wasn't one that was going to stand and fight. The bosun, now he could have had a fight with his shadow. He absolutely loved it. He was where are the pirates, because when I see them, I'm going to rip their fucking heads off, right? He absolutely wanted it with everybody. And it was between me and him, because my oppo that was with me also stayed in his cabin for actually the duration of the trip, so we can park him there, right? Me and the bosun cut around, did everything we could as per normal, put the barrels out, put the wire out, made some little traps, wired some doors shut, etc, 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 briefed the troops, rehearsed the troops, did this, did that, did the other, got ourselves up to the beginning of the internationally recognised transit corridor. We were picked up by 2 warships and we were escorted through the corridor. Now when we got to the other end, the ship that we were on was what they call a coaster. Didn't have a particularly high freeboard, all right? It had probably at the lowest point, the freeboard was probably around 2 meters, if that, all right? So not a very high freeboard, so quite an easy target. The other thing was, because it was what they call a coaster, all right, it didn't have a heavy top end speed-wise. So you were probably talking 12 knots. 12 knots it would have just about got to, 13 knots downhill, 40 knots it would have shit a gasket. It would have absolutely fucking piled in, all right? There's no chance after 14 knots it would have still been going, all right? So we knew we didn't have a great runner, right? So anyway, everybody briefed, we come off the other end and I say, right, you need to get the sewers, you need to get up into that canal, all right? You need to be up there as quick as we can, all right? Because we're going to be a great target for these people, all right? Now, we didn't let this resonate through the captain, we just let him believe that we were the highest. We were the highest prepared ship on Earth, and he was quite happy with that. So long as he got his vodka at night, he didn't care. We left first day, as we sort of like said goodbye to the warships. Not a drama. We pulled away overnight. Now the next morning, I pick up two small dots on the radar behind us on our 7 o'clock ish. Not that concerned about it. There was sort of other little bits and pieces in the area. There still were some fishermen out there, etc., trying to do bits and pieces. So it wasn't the end of the world, but it was worth looking at them. Now, as we sort of like headed up towards, and you can see on here, as we headed up towards the little bit that goes up towards Gaza, there's like a pinch point. We were headed towards that. We were still a fair few nautical miles away from where we were, but as we headed up, we had to change the angle of our approach slightly. As we changed the angle of our approach, the angle of the 2 little skiffs, that also changed as well. They were also gaining on us quite quickly, as we'd identified through the radar that they were probably doing about 25 knots, and we were probably doing about 12 and a half, all right? So We're not going to outrun these people. So I said to the first officer, can you take us 3 or 4 degrees in an opposite direction, back the way we've come, and see if these 2 dots go with us. Sure enough, boom, as he goes over, they go with. Now I'm thinking they're coming to see us. Whatever they are, they're coming to see us, all right? I'm not panicking at this stage, but the captain got wind of it. The captain got wind of it, off he goes. He's gone, he's had enough. He's in the Citadel, he's already gone. He's blown every gasket in his body and he's disappeared. Some of his staff have gone with him, so before I've even got a chance to put people into the correct sort of like drill, they've already gone. The bosun came straight up on deck and the first officer came up for a while as well. Now, I'm watching these skiffs get closer and closer. We changed the direction another 2 times or so, but they come with every time. So they're definitely 100% in my mind, they're coming for us. Whatever it is, you know, and I don't know that they might not be trying to sell us a few fish or something, right? Whatever they are, they're coming for us. So it's on, like Don Juan, all right? We're headed up towards the thing. I can't get no more speed out of it. You know, we've radioed downstairs a couple of times to ask the chief engineer, you know, can he get a bit more speed? And he just says, look, it's a waste of time, because if we try and get the speed, we might just pop the engines all together, and then if we do manage to get away from people, we're completely fucked. Do you know what I mean? So we said, right, just stay in the speed that we're doing. So we stayed at around 12.5 knots. Sure enough, within inside a couple of hours, they're at a stage where I can see that there are 5 or 6 guys in each one of these little skiffs, and they are definitely coming towards us, and the likelihood is they are pirates. All right, I've identified that. The bosun's quite excited by the prospect of getting his hands on somebody. I'm not over thrilled about it, because I know now I've got a job on my hands, because my guy who's supposed to be working with me is downstairs, completely out of it. The captain's gone. The crew now, we've thinned them out downstairs, and I'm now upstairs with just the bosun and myself. Now, I did have a few bits and pieces that I could utilise on this one. I had 3 flares, you know, they're sort of like the stress flare types, like the Somalis. I had 3 of those, and I thought, right, I can't waste them. So what I'd done was I'd removed the parachutes, we'd weighted them down a little bit, we'd packed them out, we'd cut the batteries, etc. Like, you're not supposed to have done it in a day, but everybody did, you know what I mean? If you wanted to fire these things on a flatter trajectory, you could weight them up a bit and you could take the parachute out. So I'd done that to these Somali type flares, and sure enough, as the skiffs come in for the first pass, they come down the side of the boat, to come down the side of the ship, should I say. They come down the side of the ship, and I'm trying to encourage them now to shoot at us. As soon as they see us, yes, they do let us have a little burst. Bop, 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 bop. It goes all over the place. He's not coming anywhere near me. So I'm thinking, right, if we can keep these people firing at us, we're great, we're laughing. But as they come round 2 or 3 times, letting it off every couple of squeezes, you know, they're thinking to themselves, we're getting nothing back here. So one of them decides, I'll come in a bit closer. They're at probably 50 metres now. Now he's coming to about 25. I'm thinking, come in a little bit closer, son, and as you come down the side, you can have the first flare. So, again, they've realised there's nothing coming their way. First boat creeps in a little more. He comes just off where the bridge wing was, right? So if you see the bridge wing off a ship, he comes just off the bridge wing at about 25 metres. I seize my opportunity. First flare goes, but it misses him terribly, all right? Goes straight over the top of his head. Now, all I can see from this ship was this big black face with a line of white teeth, laughing at me, all right? He's like, I've got your fucking number, son, and you've just missed me. So he quickly comes all the way around again, comes in a little bit closer, but this time I get the second flare off, and it misses fucking him by about a millimetre, misses the top of his head. Now I'm fucking laughing, do you know what I mean? I'm thinking to myself, I've got you bastard. Do you know? He pulls off a bit, goes back out, his mate covers him, and they're sort of like talking about it. You can see they're sort of like weighing it up. He comes back in again, right? Now I let him have another flare, right? This flare falls out the end of the tube and just plops straight into the water. I'm like, oh fuck. To which he starts laughing again. He then comes round 2 or 3 times, realises I've got no more flares left, and thinks to himself, I'm fucking getting on there, all right? So I'm thinking to myself, what are we gonna do? Now we did have some nuts and bolts. So we've hooned some nuts and bolts at him. Nuts and bolts. We've hooned some nuts and bolts at this lunatic, all right? It's not putting him off. The bosun could chuck a stone as well, I'm telling you. He'd have hurt you if he'd have hit you with a fucking bolt. He really would have done. But no matter now, I can see the skiff's in close enough, all right? We're sort of like peering over the edge now, and I can see they've got a homemade hook on the end of like what looked like a ladder, and they were going to try and get this thing onto the ship. So the bosun's gone into the bridge, and he's trying to lean the ship away from them as much as he can and just keep us running for as long as we can. He's holding this straight, showing them as much arse of the boat as we can. I'm now looking over the edge. I've run out of bolts. I've got nothing left. I've got nothing left to give. I'm like, At some stage, we're going to have to either get downstairs and lock ourselves in, or we're going to have to carry on fighting right to the bitter end and hope that we can either disarm one of them or they just give up. I'll go running at the bridge to see if there's anything left. You know, a flare pistol, anything. Have we overlooked something? Have we not got everything out of there? I run into the bridge and I'm like ripping desks out and I'm like, there's nothing in here, there's nothing in there, there's absolutely nothing. I look in the corner and there's a small drinks fridge about yay big. And in it is the captain's cokes for his vodka, right? I'm like, fuck. So I open the door, empty the cokes out, rip this thing from the wall and run down to the end of the bridge wing with it. The bosun's looking at me, what the fuck is he doing? And I look over the edge and I think, right, this geezer's nearly on. He's struggling because it is there's quite a swell and he's struggling to get hooked on. And I think to myself, right, I've got one shot at this to smash your fucking head in proper, right? So I look over the edge and think, look, this is going to be a lot better for me if I can get you to look at me while I'm throwing it, all right? So his mates are behind him trying to feed him stuff. His boat's going all over the place. Nobody's really touching their weapons at the moment because they know they're unopposed, so they're not really worrying about having to fucking cover each other because they know they've got nothing to cover back. Their concern is getting on the boat, so they're all looking in at geezer with the ladder type thing, right? So I look over the edge and I'm like, all right, doesn't work. I look over the edge again, all right! As he looks up, I'm like, fuck you. And I throw this fridge as hard as I ever could down the side of the ship. And it sort of like tumbles, but it's not got the greatest of aerodynamic fucking shapes. So it doesn't go straight where I wanted it. And it fucking misses his head by, if the flare was close, this thing's fucking closer. But it doesn't hit him. It knocks onto the front of where his rope is tied onto his little skiff and the ladder's on. He's just about got the ladder off, but this thing smashes the cleat clean off the boat. So now his ladder's not attached to the boat anymore. His boat's drifting. He's come away from the ship almost straight away, instantaneously. He's fucking looking up at that and he must have thought to himself, I've had enough of this idiot. He really did. So luckily, they peeled away and they disappeared. It could have been so different. If I hadn't have got the fridge, if I hadn't have got down the ship, if I hadn't have thrown it, if I hadn't have yelled at him first, if it hadn't have hit the click, they would have been on, and then it would have been a completely different day, and I might not have been stood here now. So that was the mission, was to keep the ship safe, and we did it by hook or by crook, and I'm here to tell the tale.